This week's episode of our show has been sponsored by Fables, the new episodic monthly subscription from Ghostfire Gaming.
Fables is an episodic monthly release that's an adventure that includes all of the maps, tokens, and everything you need to run it at your table.
Each Fable comprises of 6 linked episodes released over 6 months. Put them all together and you have a complete campaign.
Set in the worlds of Grimhollow, the first campaign, known as the Citadel of the Unseen Sun, takes place in the Estoian Empire, a realm of unending night, where vampires reign supreme and people live in fear of the unending darkness.
In this first Fable, it's up to your characters to bring the light back into this dark world. And best of all, the final dungeon of this 6-part series might have been written by a certain pair of dudes who might be experts in dungeons.
The first episode is coming in January of 2022, but if you sign up now, you'll get a discounted rate on your subscription. So follow the links below to get in your pre-orders now.
And now, on to this week's episode. Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything D&D, including advice for players and guides for DMs.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
This is part 2 of our subclass tier ranking for the Bard in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. In this video, we're actually only taking a look at one new Bard subclass that was introduced in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Now, the College of Eloquence and the College of Creation were both printed in Tasha's Cauldron, but only the College of Creation is the new subclass here because the College of Eloquence had previously appeared in the Mythic Odysseys of Theros supplement and was actually one that we ranked very highly in our last subclass tier ranking. So you can check that out up over here.
So up on screen right now, you're going to see the criteria that we use to rank the subclasses. We pit the subclasses against each other and not those of other classes. Keep in mind that although we may talk about flavor and themes and as well as multiclassing, these are not core mechanics that we look at for ranking.
As always, when we rank the subclasses, we consider all pillars of play. It's not just how well the class performs in combat, but how well the subclass takes the core features of the base class and augments them, so giving the character more capabilities to contribute to problem solving, exploration, interaction, and all the wide variety of situations that bards find themselves in over the course of their D&D adventures. The bard is a very versatile class already, and in many ways, the base features of the bard subclass between your skill choices and your spell choices give you so many different ways of customizing your character to really be prepared to handle almost any situation. One of the things that we see a lot when we rank the bard subclasses is this question of, can the bard reproduce the subclass feature by using a spell? When we see a subclass that recreates features that can be recreated with spell choices, we tend to not rank that too highly because committing to an entire subclass is a bigger commitment for your character overall than choosing 1 or 2 extra spells.
The Bard subclass tier ranking was one of the earliest ranking videos that we actually did on our channel. And for that reason, since we only have one subclass to talk about today, I think that Monty and I should also spend some time looking back at anything that's changed or any new opinions on the Bard subclasses.
There's a lot to discuss, so let's get rolling. So to kick things off, let's look at the College of Creation. This Bard subclass tunes into the powerful words of creation, which actually I thought was something that all bards did, but maybe that's a previous edition lore sort of thing. And this bard actually is able to use their magic to create real objects, or semi-real objects. Right away, when your bard chooses the College of Creation, you'll gain the Mote of Potential feature at 3rd level. This will give you 3 benefits when you use your Bardic Inspiration feature that augment your Bardic Inspiration when it is used for attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws, respectively. When a creature uses your Bardic Inspiration die for an attack roll, this Mote of Inspiration explodes, and the creatures that are within 5 feet of the target of the attack all have to make Constitution saving throws, or they take thunder damage equal to the die roll of the Bardic Inspiration die.
When you use it for an ability check, you actually get to roll the Bardic Inspiration die twice and choose which roll you want to use. And finally, when you use it for a saving throw, you actually get to add the value of the dice plus the Bard's Charisma modifier as temporary hit points.
I think that all of these features are pretty idiot-proof when it comes to using them. You get the extra reliability for ability checks. You get a little bit of extra damage floating on top of an attack roll, although I think it's not a lot of extra damage, and the saving throw is kind of easy to make. But whatever. And temporary hit points are always nice, although I would prefer to be able to use the temporary hit points before I have to make a saving throw.
I do think that when we look at the pros and cons of this ability, adding extra potential to Bardic Inspiration is always something that we love to see with the Bards. I think that the Bards are always going to be using Bardic Inspiration. It's kind of their bread and butter. So just seeing more value out of that is great.
Yeah.
I do wish, though, that it's hard to kind of choose or pick. It's only when it comes up. If you wish you had temporary hit points, the option of needing to be making a saving throw that you're potentially failing, so you're going to use the Bardic Inspiration on that in order to get those temporary hit points, is kind of a roundabout system of getting something that you wish you could just be like, I wish I got temporary hit points.
I feel with this ability, you're still going to use Bardic Inspiration the way that you always used it, and it's always going to be good. You're just getting a little bit more out of your Bardic Inspirations, which is great. Many of the other Bard subclasses change the way that you use your Bardic Inspiration. This one doesn't really. It just gives you more for doing what you were already going to do.
Also at 3rd level, you gain Performance of Creation. Now you can create a non-magical object, medium size or smaller, within 10 feet of you. The item that you create cannot have a gold value of more than 20 times your Bard level. Also, the object is obviously a magical creation because it glows and emits a sound, kind of like a song, the Song of Creation, perhaps. It lasts a number of hours equal to your proficiency bonus, and you can only have one object at a time. If you use this feature, you can use it again using a 2nd level spell slot. But other than that, it's until you take a long rest.
If you do use it again, any previous item that you've created immediately vanishes. And the maximum size of the object that you can create also does go up as you gain levels. At level 6, you can make a large object. And at level 14, you can make a huge object. The text refers you to the equipment list in the player's handbook for a list of example potential objects. This is one of those amazing creative shenanigan abilities. There's very mundane things that we can do with this ability, such as making a musical instrument when one gets taken away from us, making a weapon when we need to hide one, or even making a suit of armor, although the gold piece limit cost is really going to limit you to the armor that you can make. Also, incidentally, making a ranged weapon is pretty difficult with this ability because you can make the ranged weapon, but you can't make the ammunition for it.
I also think that when we get into the text and wording of this ability, you're going to want to talk to your dungeon master. In my opinion, there are some really interesting shenanigans that actually probably won't work. I think an important idea that is missing from the text is that you as a bard should not be able to create anything that you don't already have knowledge of. If there's a locked door in front of you, yeah, you could create a key, but because you don't know the inner workings of the lock, it won't be an exact key for that door. If you need information, let's say, on necromancers, and you say, well, I'm going to create a book about necromancers. Well, when you open that book, it's only going to have what you already know about necromancers in there. So you can't gain any sort of information or create an object that kind of diverts the expectations of what you would be able to find out on your own anyway. For this reason, I think that that limitation is important and allows this to be a fair ability and not bypass every situation.
Yeah, and obviously you can't create a magical object, so you can't make a healing potion, you can't make a spell scroll. We do get into a little bit of iffy territory of here, can you make holy water or alchemist's fire or even something like a poison with this? That might work. You could make a set of tools. So while you might not be able to make the key to open the door in front of you, you could potentially make a lockpick or a set of tools that you use to make poison or something of the like. And of course, as you gain levels and can make more valuable or larger objects, you could also make things like vehicles, like wagons and sleds and even small boats. So it does mean that there's a lot of sort of utility here in what this character is able to bring. I think that it's a little bit costly, though. This reminds me of the Conjuration Wizard feature that they get at 2nd level. But the thing is here is you only get to use this ability once per day, and then you have to use a 2nd level spell slot to do it again. So this is by no means an unlimited feature. And I think that constraint of needing to expend a spell slot to create the object is actually quite costly, because one of the things that I will note is that there is a spell that you can do to do this. It's Fabricate. The main benefit that this ability has over a spell like Fabricate is that Fabricate requires you to have the raw materials on hand, which can be a pretty big limitation. That said, there are a lot of ways to bring objects into being and manipulate the environment in interesting ways. So I do think that this ability is pretty useful in that you can create something from nothing.
At 6th level, we gain Animating Performance. Now you can take a non-magical object that is large or smaller and animate it into a dancing object. The stat block for the dancing item is what you're going to use for this, and it dances around the battlefield. It can make move actions and reactions normally, but unless you use a bonus action to command it, it's going to just take the dodge action on its turn. Most notably, though, one of the coolest parts of this feature is that if you decide to use your Bardic Inspiration as your bonus action, you can do that on top of commanding your dancing item. The dancing item has some cool abilities. It can attack, but also it can slow or speed up any creature within 10 feet of it. So you can either slow your enemies or speed up your allies as it dances around the battlefield.
It is pretty fragile, though. It only has an AC of 16, and it has hit points equal to 10 plus 5 times your Bard level. So while this does scale up, and it only ever makes one attack that does force damage, but the damage on it doesn't really scale that quickly. So it is kind of squishy. It can fly, though, but it doesn't make ranged attacks. In combat, it doesn't require your concentration. So you can have this thing acting and fighting and still have another spell in effect, like maybe Animate Objects, which seems like a perfect spell for a College of Creation Bard, or maybe your standard Hypnotic Pattern or Fear or Polymorph or any of the other amazing Bard spells that are out there. This is not going to prevent you from concentrating. That would really kill the feature. You could have another one of those summon spells as well. This is very much like the other summon spells introduced in Tasha's Cauldron, except you don't have to concentrate on it, which is great.
I do like that not only does it not take your concentration, but the fact that it doesn't limit your use of Bardic Inspiration. Mm-hmm. It's basically saying, here's an ability, here's how it works, but don't worry, it won't interfere with anything else you want to do as a Bard. That makes it a pretty valuable option. Yeah.
You get to use this once per day, and it lasts for 1 hour, but then you can use a 3rd level spell slot to bring it out again. 3rd level spell slots are super sweet, and so I find it very difficult to spend that again. Hopefully you bring it out once for an hour and that's all you need it for. If you really need it again after that first hour, I would think carefully about the cost of using that spell slot. I would definitely bring it out again outside of combat. I wouldn't make sure that if you're going to use this ability, because it does last for an hour, make sure that you activate it before combat begins so you don't have to spend an action summoning it, so that it can get right to doing cool things.
At 14th level, you gain the Creative Crescendo ability, which augments your Performance of Creation ability. This now allows you to make a number of objects when you use the ability equal to your Charisma modifier. Now you get to ignore the gold value of the objects that you're creating, but only one of them can be of the maximum size. The rest can be either tiny or small. Now, this is, at first, it's augmenting probably the hardest to use ability of the Creation Bard, I would say. But what's really interesting is there's some really, really awesome shenanigans that you can get up to.
There are. And now we can make a huge object and several small or tiny objects. So if we have a charisma of 20, we can make one big thing and 4 smaller things. And when we use the ability again, we can replace or change out what items we have available. So we can never have more than 5 with a charisma of 20, but we can continue using them.
So now you're about to go to war and everybody's looking at the fighters, the rangers. Oh, you're going to be great on the front lines. You know who's actually going to be great in a siege? The Creation Bard.
Yeah, because the Creation Bard can make a trebuchet or a cannon or a catapult or a battering ram or siege weapons and just snap of their fingers, call it up with some ammo.
Oh, we have 20 people here who need to get across the lake. Well, I can create a longboat and a few oars.
Yeah, creating those oars is really critical as well.
Not enough people in the game are able to create oars, but now the College of Creation Bard can create up to 5 oars if they need to.
Yeah, or 4 and the boat. I think that the biggest thing here is that at 14th level, we can now make a huge object and a few other smaller ones, and there's no gold piece limit to it. So it really does allow us to do those things like make ships and big vehicles and cannons. So you really are now unlimited on what you want to do with this feature. Again, it can't be a magical object, so I don't know if we would be able to make an airship. It's going to depend on the technology level of your setting, though, because maybe, in some campaign settings, it's not unreasonable to do something like make a hot air balloon or an ornithopter with this, or some sort of flying machine of some kind, right? If you're playing in a modern setting, can you use this to make a car?
Technically, if you don't have horses around, you can't create a horse, but you could create a bike.
I mean, assuming, again, the technology level of your setting, right? I think that this is... Because the biggest thing here is that prior to this, the maximum expensive item that you could make was about 280 gold pieces, because the 13th level bard, 260 gold pieces actually, because the 13th level bard can make one of up to that value. But at 14th level, all of a sudden your value just shoots up to anything, and you've got huge objects on the table. So now, if you want to, you can make plate armor for a bunch of people. You can make higher quality weapons or anything like that. Again, they can't be magical in nature, but they could be pretty big, right? Like, could we make an entire vat of poison? I don't know. Could we make a huge barrel of explosives? Could we make a bomb with this? This is where I start to go, yeah, could you make a giant drum of TNT?
And this is why I think this ability, and this being the core of the Creation Bard, when we actually get into it, I think that it's hard to give this a solid ranking. There's potential here that this Bard could be game-changing. It could be S tier.
It very much, I think, especially with the 14th level feature, because prior to that, the Dungeon Master always has an out, right? The Dungeon Master can always say, well, you can't make a giant barrel of explosives because that costs more than 100 gold pieces. But here, it's can you make an A-bomb? Again, modern, don't allow, be careful with a modern setting. How stringent is your DM going to be with you? If you're going to make a cannon, is a cannon, the gunpowder, and the cannonballs, are those separate objects? Are those one object? How do you actually quantify those things? So a lot of this is going to rely on DM interpretation. If you have a very permissive dungeon master in a setting with a high level of technology, this is absolutely S tier. But if you don't, it really falls back.
Yeah, I also think that on top of the DM interpretation, there's also the creativity level of the player.
Yeah.
Some players might actually find limitations on, sometimes when you're on the spot, thinking of the most clever solution of an object that you could create to solve the problem is not readily apparent. And after the session, you might go, oh man, I could have just made a crowbar to pry open that door. But you didn't think of it on the spot. So the creativity level of the player, the DM interpretation, and also the situations you find yourself in the campaign. Like we said, you can create a cannon or a trebuchet or a catapult or a boat. But if you never encounter a siege, you never encounter water where you're going to need a boat, you start to fall off. Another great example is a prison break. Okay, you've lost all of your items and you're tied up. You break out, you create weapons for the whole party, and now you're good to go. But these are situations that might not happen.
Well, and I also think it is worthwhile mentioning that the Bard still has a lot of versatility without this ability because of all their other spells. We're talking about an ability of what it can do at 14th level. But at 14th level, Bards can already do things like teleport and make force cages and summon tons of creatures and animate tons of objects. So Bards are already really powerful at this level of play. And there actually is an argument to be saying that making a cannon at 14th level isn't actually all that impressive.
Because I can also make a force cage.
Yeah, right. So, and when we're thinking about situations like conventional sieges Or getting across an ocean. Well, why do I need to make a boat to get across an ocean when I can teleport to the other side? So there's some interesting things about how this ability scales up versus your bard's other abilities and powers. It's still an ability that you can only use once per day, or you have to use a second level spell slot to activate it again. And there could be other situations that are better solved by using your spell slots to actually cast a spell. So aside from that one use of it that you get once per day, you do have to measure it against, okay, well, what am I actually accomplishing with these spells? Absolutely. Is making a cannon for a second level spell slot amazing? Yes. So there's a lot of creative play here. I do think ultimately with this subclass, I'm tempted. I'm really hard pressed with it. There's a part of me that's like, well, this is so subjective. And when we take out the subjective elements of the class, we're left with something that isn't all that impressive.
I think that this, by our textbook, is a B tier subclass. And I use the term B endearingly in this case.
Yes. B
tier is S tier in the right campaign. And I think, again, with a creative player who has that mental shopping list of 101 uses for what they could create to solve problems, this is a really cool bard to play. But if you lack that creativity, or you're in a campaign where these options don't present themselves, then I think it starts to fall off and you're left with a cool way to use Bardic Inspiration. But there are other subclasses that get cooler ways to use Bardic Inspiration, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that if you are in a combat-heavy campaign, the benefits of creating objects like this are not all that impressive. Like, if we evaluate what this subclass actually gives you in a combat-specific circumstance, because even being able to create a siege weapon, in many combat encounters, we've had battles in our campaigns where we have made siege weapons, and it is a very strategic thing to set one of those things up. Because, yes, you can make a cannon, but you made that cannon, and a cannon still requires a crew of people to fire and operate.
What I think this subclass does is it takes the utility portion of the bard and dials it up. But it doesn't do as much for the other aspects of what a bard brings to the table. And although it might be the best utility bard out of them all, it's not the best at... Utility is something that we are going to see helpful in a lot of situations. But it's not going to win the day when push comes to shove.
Yeah, and I think the utility here is all about prop comedy. Because, again, the question of can you make an object that lets your party fly is still pretty questionable. And so we could just cast the fly spell, right? Can we make an object that deals damage to our enemies? Maybe, but we could also just cast animate objects. And so this is where I think we have to be really careful with this ability and how permissive it becomes. Because yes, if you have a super permissive DM that's totally on board with you making giant bats of poison, huge things of explosives, vehicles, and all sorts of like technological things that your mind can conjure up, I think that your dungeon master's probably digging their own grave there and is going to start wondering why they said yes to all this. And that whenever we run into that high level of DM subjectivity, I think we have to kind of err on the side of being conservative with this and give it a B.
I think B is fair, and I think that a creative player will have a blast playing this bard. And something that we've said about bards in the past is that all bards are pretty fun. Even the ones that we rank C and D are pretty fun to play. Bards are just good in general. And the Creation Bard is not a far step away from that. They're a very fun idea, but they're not the most powerful bard option.
Yeah, and I think that when we look back to our previous rankings for the bards in our first video, because that was one of the first subclass tier rankings we did, I think it wasn't clear at the time that we were ranking the subclasses against each other and not the other classes. And so thinking back on it, one of the things that I would say is that, originally we gave the Whispers Bard and the Swords Bard a C and D ranking. And, well, I think now I could be persuaded to bump the Swords Bard up a little bit. Not the Whispers Bard. No way. The Bard is still an S tier class.
Yeah. In our books, the D ranked bard still falls higher than some of the B and A ranked other classes.
Yes.
So when we say that the swords bard is a D and the whispers bard is a C, that doesn't mean you're not having a good time playing them on the table.
What it comes back down to is that in many cases, the bard, rather than being the jack of all trades and master of none, the bard can kind of eat everyone else's lunch if they want to. In 5th edition, it really is a powerful class where you have to just decide what your bard is going to be the best at, which I think is the challenge of it. It's very difficult to make a bard that does everything the best at the same time, and it's also easy to make a bard that does a lot of different things, but none of them very well. I think the bard is at their very best when you as a player choose a few things for them to be really, really excellent at and have a little bit more focus, because you can almost, the versatility of the bard is kind of this accordion. It's like if you're too versatile, it snaps the elastics. If you're just the right amount, man, oh man, is it a great class to play.
So with that, let's take a look at what our community thought of the College of Creation Bard. We're looking at an 11.9% for S tier. We have a 39.6% for A tier, a 39.2% for B tier, an 8.1% for C, and barely any for D tier. So this lands pretty much in between A and B, leaning point percentage-wise to the A.
Yeah. You know what? I think our community saw all the creative potential in the subclass and absolutely fell in love with it, and I don't blame them for it one bit. I think that this is one of those subclasses where you can get very, very excited about the shenanigans and then be disappointed when your dungeon master feels differently.
Yeah, and that's the one thing to look out for. Now, it riding that middle ground between A and B, I think, is super appropriate. For some players, this is going to be A tier, pushing S. And for some players, this is going to feel like a B tier subclass. So you get to kind of make the call on that, on whether or not you feel like you're creative enough to really pull out the incredible shenanigans possible with this Bard subclass.
I think that if you do plan on playing a College of Creation Bard, you should have a very long conversation with your dungeon master over what to expect from this ability, and you should be very specific. This is one of those subclasses that prompts players to do this sort of evasive play style where they explain the steps of their process, hoping that their dungeon master doesn't put it all together so that they can sneak something in and kind of force the dungeon master to rule it their way. I see this a lot with creative players because they're afraid that if they spill the beans to their DM, the DM's going to see what they're up to and is going to shoot it down. I will say, though, players, it works the opposite. The more you tell your dungeon master what you're intending to do, the more likely they are to not shoot you down unexpectedly, because then they can work with you on how to pull off your creative vision. So with the College of Creation, I think you should be very, very specific as to what you're hoping to achieve when you conjure your objects. That will help dungeon masters be willing to work with you creatively as well.
So this has been our tier ranking for the Bard subclasses Part 2 in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Please tell us about your experiences with the College of Creation Bard in the comments below.
The videos that we make on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. From both Kelly and myself to all of you out there on Patreon, a huge thank you for making our work possible. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, please consider becoming a patron and joining our community by following the links in the description below.
And don't forget to check out our live stream, Shadows of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we've got plenty more tier rankings for all the various classes in D&D 5e right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time in the dungeon.